Poetic peeps and gentle persons and betweeners and nonconformers, genders all and genders equal. Welcome to Eat the Storms, the poetry podcast. My name is Damien B. Donnelly. I get to be the host and producer, and thank you so much for tuning in today, tomorrow, yesterday, next year, or next week in what is now the official final episode of Eat the Storms, the poetry podcast for 2024. I thought our Christmas episode was going to be the final episode, but somewhere in between the cooking and the baking and the washing and the wrapping and the roasting and the hosting, I managed to find a little space and put together one final episode to bring us over to the new year. So thank you so much, all of you, for tuning in, whether that's on platforms like Spotify, Apple, Google, Breaker, Podbean, Player FM, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Podcast Addicts, iTunes, or possibly even YouTube or Amazon Music. I hope you are all well rested, stuffed perhaps. I hope you've all had long walks on the beach or over mountains or through the suburbs. And those of you who didn't manage to put on the stretchy pants with the extra stretchy waistbands to make sure that you could expand when you ate all the food on Christmas Day, I hope that you had somebody close behind you to give you a little burping. Today, I am delighted to welcome 4 poets to the podcast, 2 returning guests and 2 first-timers to Eat the Storms, bringing with them recently published collections, debut collections, bilingual poems, and by the end of this episode you might be feeling a little bit hot under the collar as we get sweet and saucy with our Behind the Storms conversation. So all that is yet to come, and all that's required for you over the next hour and 10 minutes is to ensure that you have whatever leftovers were at hand, whether that be the turkey, a little bit of grilled meatloaf, the final dollop of cream to pour over the last mince pie, and perhaps even a glass of reheated mulled wine. My name is Damien B. Donnelly, this is Eat the Storms, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Now, my first guest on the show today is originally from County Wexford here in Ireland, but has long been a resident of Dalkey in County Dublin. And I had the extreme pleasure of being present at her book launch earlier this year for her 6th poetry collection, May Swim, which was published by Blood Axe Books. She has been a recipient of the O'Shaughnessy Award for Irish Poetry, is a former journalist with the Irish Times, and has taught creative writing at the Institute of Art, Design and Technology in Dún and at the NUI in Maynooth. With poems from that recent collection, May Swim, to open us today on the Poetry Podcast, I'm delighted to welcome for the first time, but hopefully not the last, to Eat the Storms, this is Katie Donovan.
Hello Stormers, my name's Katie Donovan and I'm delighted to have been invited by Damien to read some poems for his wonderful podcast. I'm here in my home in Dalkey. It's a sunny Sunday and I can hear the birds tweeting and chirping in the background, and I must go out and feed them when I've done this. And I'm going to start with a poem that it's from my new book, May Swim, which came out earlier this year. It's called Deluge. It's about a rainy night in June, but it's also about my garden and the rescue of a bee. The first 3 poems are going to be watery, as you may have guessed from the title of my collection. Water is kind of my go-to place for inspiration and for actual swims too. Deluge. I pass, scarcely noticing the raft, a leaf floating in the full bucket beneath the water butt. Clinging on, a sailor in the storm, a soaked bee. I bring it in, show my daughter, this striped survivor of the June showers. Set on our kitchen table, the bee is offered mock orange, clover, and buttercup. First it dries its fur by combing with hind legs. When the wet is routed, its proboscis delves for nectar. At last the wings are energized to whir, so we venture out, a mild night, getting ready for another downpour. Undaunted, the bee takes flight. We smile and, turning, find a frilled green moth, flirting on a tassel like an acrobat, taking shelter in our light. At our feet a snail glides, smooth and unguent on slick ground, a woodlouse clinging to its shell, a miniature rodeo chancer, catching a free ride as the flood gathers. I'm now going to read the title poem, May Swim, which was written in the first terrible lockdown of COVID-19, where we were told you can only travel within a 2-kilometre radius of your home. Luckily, my local beach, White Rock, where I like to swim, which is kind of at the end of Killiney Beach, was within that radius, so it helped to keep me afloat in more ways than one. May Swim, White Rock, 2020. I wade in, my hands wringing from the pain of the water's freezing touch, its greed to suck the warmth from my toasted skin. After immersion, every cell tingles, glowing and replete. I peel off wet togs and dress, the clench of fear released. I'm a sea pink, blooming in the rocks. So the last poem in the book was also inspired by my local beach, where it's about 3 years ago now. It was late in the season. It was kind of seal pupping time. And I went in for a swim on a day where I possibly should have shown a bit more sense. But I suppose the main thing about this poem is the respect that we swimmers need to have for the sea, not just as a force that is greater than us, but as a habitat for other creatures. It's their habitat. It's not our pleasure ground. The seal. What are you doing in my element? The seal's black eyes challenge me as I flail in the tall waves, seaweed tangling my legs. Wild whiskered canine of the salt, he appraises me with a hunter's look. He's far too close, with a head on him, like a bucket. I scrabble and squawk, kicking to cheat the tide and his looming bulk, to show my friend I'm safe. Really I am, I can do this. Just as my feet find purchase, a wave breaks. I'm thrown, tumbled, reefed, as the water curls and separates, sand whirling my ears, weed muddling my hair, shingle scrubbing me raw. I shove up, shaken, snot-slimed, flesh marbled cold. The seal drifts north, sinking and surfacing in comfort. I stumble in the stinging spray, clumsy interloper, refusing to buckle. And the last poem I'm going to read to you lovely stormers, again, huge thanks and love to Damien for all the work he does, is called Dancing Queens, and it's another poem of survival, I suppose. It's dedicated to my childhood friend, Catherine Harris, with whom I went to discos when we were really too young to get in, but with a bit of makeup, we managed. And the hotel where we used to go to those discos way back when was where she chose to have her 60th birthday party, where we both danced to the same songs of our youth. Dancing Queens for Catherine Harris. Hair lemon washed, eyelids spangled blue, we pretended to be older for the disco doormen in the Marine Hotel. Now we stomp its boards to celebrate our 60s, a new decade just breached. We shimmy, gyrate, shake and spin our mysterious bodies that have crawled, sailed, birthed and mourned, yet in many ways feel the same. We spiral back to lost scenes, singing along to your sister's Beatles tunes, infusing yesterday with every tremolo of our young throats, sneaking to the kitchen for spoonfuls of Horlicks powder, crackers and butter, our midnight feasts, and later laughing in hysterical disbelief at the book your mother gave you, The Facts of Life. Thank you.
And now from Ireland we are taking flight and heading to rural Spain for an English writer who's living over there, and he's going to be sharing poems with us from his new collection, his debut collection. Consolamentum was published earlier this year by the brilliant Black Bough Poetry. This writer has had work published in places like I Am, Black Bough, Eat the Storms of course, the Madrid Review, and has had essays and short stories published by Dark Mountain Project. He is a Pushcart Prize and a Best of the Net nominee, and currently I am delighted that myself and this next guest are both part of the Whiskey Tree Wave 2, which is from Broken Spine Arts, and it's coming in January. Here to share poems from that debut collection, Consolamentum, I'm so pleased to welcome back to Eat the Storms, James McConachie.
Hi everyone who's listening, and thanks so much Damien for having me back on Eat the Storms to hawk my debut collection Consolamentum, which you can buy from Black Bough Poetry or Amazon. Okay, that's the sales part over. Okay, I'm going to read an odd selection of poems from the collection, just to switch it up a bit. This first one is called She Watches Me. She watches me across the table, and I know, because I am old and now, at last, I know some things. Does he even like me? I cannot answer your question. Take instead our mirrored hips. At once, 2 glasses levelled, slowly to our lips. You scan the crowd as I watch your hands. Look to the cold, silver sinew of your neck. You catch me looking, and of course, we know, as have we always since the first. But this old rube has the dank weight of his sins and sorrows. His crazed eye gleams in its madness over the hills, lost loves, the sadness of their long-forgotten barrows. And so, for all these many, and because of this, you have it in your power. Don't touch my arm. We must not kiss. Okay, my next poem is an unapologetically sleazy poem about a night out in Granada, which was fun. Granada. Gunning that crappy car over the Pass of Sighs, the Suspiro del Moro, to El Albaicin, we made it, just about, to happy hour, 2 for 1, absinthe, so we were fucked by 9, and absent, lost our friends all track of time. It rained, there was a man in spats, a white suit, and some good coke, flaky pink. We chased the night around the cistern tops, the sinks, and only stopped when Lally spoke to listen to the shouting on the street, La Casa de las Putas, where the girls were moving out, a fat gitana singing alegrias, hanging sheets, called to me, Churumbel. All the while, the palace on the granite apple hill, the courtyards and the cypress trees. Conversos caught the sunrise on the Sierra's mantlefold with prayer mats, earnest knees. The night was over as a candle guttered cold. By the Elvira gate, too soli sombras for our ragged nerves, at last we found the fucking car. Tostadas con aceite y café. The shouting truckers in that dirty roadside bar. Something a little gentler now. This is called It Is Not the Wind Nor the Flag, and it's from the Zen Buddhist tale of a Zen master asking of his novices, I suppose, when you see a flag blowing in the wind, which is it? Is it the wind moving or the flag? And the answer he gives is that it's neither. It is your mind that moves. Anyway, it is not the wind nor the flag. So swam today, and prayed and wished and vowed, out over the silty swell, for a wave to break onto a different kind of day, a different kind of man. A me who pays his taxes on time, chooses a practical car, a sensible woman. But there were only the swallows, dancing their light over the water as I trod the deep. Otters called to their friends beyond the bridge. The blind gnosis of the sun warmed the stones, dried my wetsuit, while the wind rippled the tops and quietly quivered all of the known world with mild, eternal, unthinking delight. This next poem is from a series of little old lady poems which I seem to write and accumulate for some reason I don't fully understand, and it's called Carmen. Marvel here at Carmen. Hair just done and out with jolly company. A little sun, but not too much. Despite her 87 years, orders a modest glass of frosted, golden, ice-cold beer, a plate of anchovies, then home for lunch. Remember to turn off the stock. To sleep a while, the coolest corner of her low salon, the dryly ticking clock. The sun slides down the wall. At 9, she's up and out again, for dinner with her foolish cousin and his handsome friend. That time there were 2 heavy horses, taken by the flood and drowned, when they were living up above the valley of the Silver Spring, the other side of town. The tiny cart her father carved from coppiced box that Christmas. In the sun, he sang when it was threshing time, and hammered out the scythe blade on the step. Slow days of spoon-scooped sticky honey from a coiled skep bought at the fair, a ribbon from the gypsies, and the first time she saw Paco standing at the counter over there. Those angry, hungry years they had. When cancer took him, she confessed, said in her heart she couldn't say she wasn't glad he'd gone. Now 20 years along, her son's all up and grown, until the summer when they come and fill the house again, take La Fresqueta out on plastic chairs, or in the garage making lace and laughing as the children play till after midnight in the square. Marvels. Marvel here with me at Carmen. Hair just done and out with jolly company. She wets her lips and slowly sips the years, enjoys her modest glass of frosted, golden, ice-cold beer. My last poem is called Baston, which in Spanish is a walking stick. Baston. Hunger for the good years of it, strong in the heart, ready for fencing again, for sun-sloped meadows north, thick with green butterflies, clean clover fat as cream, and shine-eyed slippery foals with fennel tails of the wild verge, hide of bright herbs. The ocean and its light, whirlwinds with grey gales, and moss clogging the holy well, rain-twitching ferns, and the waves' dark, surging knowings that I sometimes crave. Sap spilled over the fall of another month, the harvest hurried away and gone. My God, the night is long. That's it. Thanks, Damien, and good luck.
And now from Spain, we're coming back to Ireland for a writer originally born in County Meath, but now living in County Dublin, not far from me, just up along the coast in Skerries. But Meath is the place in which her stories and her poetry have begun, taking her on journeys around her surrounding Gormanstown Castle, where she walked amid the yew trees planted by her ancestors, and then travels that took her further on to Dublin, to Austria, to Limerick, to Galway, to the USA. Her poem Archetypes was published by Poetry Worth Hearing, episode 2024. In 2023, she was awarded a place in the Northern Soul Roadshow by the Irish Writers' Centre. She has read on various open mics and was awarded a bursary on the John Hewitt International Summer School in 2024 and a fiction workshop with Claire Keegan in 2023. She has also been invited to be a reader at the Edinburgh Flash Competition Awards for 2024-2025. Today, reading for us poems in English, and also I'm delighted to say a bilingual poem in English and in Irish, Oscailga. This is the wonderful Carmel McKeown.
Thank you, Damien, for this. My first poem on Fear Gorta is based on my studies of Yeats. According to Yeats's fairy and folk tales of the Irish peasantry, An Fear Gorta is a man of hunger or famine. He is a phantom of hunger resembling an emaciated human. According to Yeats, An Fear Gorta walks the earth during times of famine or times of hunger, seeking alms from passers-by. After I read about An Fear Gorta in relation to Yeats's work, I wrote this poem while thinking that perhaps we could do with An Fear Gorta in the Dublin of today. An Fear Gorta. Tá an fear gorta ag siúl gach lá sna sráidena bhaile átha clia san am I láthair. He changes form to the passer-by, collects monies or a ham sandwich, and not far away from where he sits, siúlann sé cúpla céim idir na corp. He places his collection inside a sleeping bag of a still creature whose unconscious body has not returned from the depths of tranquility. An bhfuil siad ina gullah? No, an bhfuil siad marav? Tá an fear gorta ag siúl gach lá sna sráidena bhaile átha clia san am I láthair. Stench of dead debris and broken lives hang in the air. His atmosphere of future, past and now, his own body racked upon the pinnacle of all that seems to be of St. Stephen's Green, Bewley's Cafe and Brown Thomas, the many needs of many, a chón agus a chón. The Irish people, home to everyone, a globule within the globe. Tá an fear gorta ag siúl gach lá sna sráidena bhaile átha clia san am I láthair. Tá grá mór agam the bhaile átha clia, ach ní bhaith lom an fear gorta a eicáil. Tá súla gom nach mé sé ag tastáil go lua, go nairóí na críthe bharva a ríis. Ach, May fui bhróin haar rud ar bith eile. A chón agus a chón. An bhfuil na daoine marmh. No, an bhfuil siad ina ghola. My second poem is called Potholes. Dear refugee, grab a bicycle for yourself and enjoy this home of new, avoiding puddles forever wet on country lanes. Steer clear of man-made potholes, years of movement depressed. Enjoy the shucks that run along our fields. Beware these days of tractors, noisy harvesters and cars, damned scooters with owners all in black. They'll blast you into graveyards, give no warning and no care. You'll be gone before your next year has arrived. And I want to say your name right, but I twist my tongue each time and I stumble over syllables after many hours of chant. Please speak your own words to me, though I'll not understand, and let us speak together, holding hands. Dear refugee, I think my tongue was severed when my elders, forced to change, lay starving in these shucks or took the soup, took religion not their own, or the boat too far away. Yet today some people ask why you've come here. Do not stop to speak and sing in your own melodic voice. Embrace our own sweet music, diddly-eye. And we'll learn each other's lyrics. We'll mix the tunes up well. With our symphony of sound, our walls will shake. Shake the countryside with sound, shade our difference away, let our words offending others melt and lie upon our roads, like they did among our games when we biked our way to school, missed the potholes and the puddles on our way. My next poem is called Our Trees Need to Grow. In this new bright big room I shudder and my legs won't be still, no curtains yet to shade my face. The tumty-tum of outside traffic, their eyes are all on mine, clear sips of water calms me down. To shade this bright big room, our trees will need to grow. Plant them. Listen to words spoken. Let's turn the leaves in time. My voice is getting loud and I know I need to repeat. To shade this big bright room, our trees will need to grow, and they will need fresh water. So do we. My fourth and final poem is titled Never a Rolling Stone, and I wrote it for one of my brothers who had a roundy birthday recently. Never a rolling stone. Island man of Ireland, Leinster man of Meath, family man of Max. As loyal as the dog, never a rolling stone, still always on the move. The clan of the clan, you toil, ruck, water the flowers of your seed, and earth the planted pot, where diverse blossoms bloom, who sing your stories wide. Not limited by sea or photos of your past, nor the nescience of life. They learn from nosology, their present from your past, their future in your own. Thank you very much, Damien. Thank you.
And now it's time for a little conversation. It's time to welcome my final guest to the podcast. And this final guest, 2 weeks ago, very graciously agreed to join me behind the storms to talk about all things poetic. So grab yourself a fresh cup of tea, open another bottle of Prosecco, or perhaps still some mulled wine left over, and make sure you've got something to nibble on. This is where we go behind the storms. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Mark Ward to join us. Mark has a BA in English Literature with an emphasis on creative writing, prose and dramatic texts from Brunel University in London, and an MA in creative writing from Queen's University. In 2018, he was awarded a mentorship with poet Nell Reagan by Words Ireland, and that same year, Finishing Line Press published his debut chapbook, Circumference, followed by Carcass in 2020, Hike in 2022, Fault Lines then appeared online in 2022 and later in print form in 2024. And also in 2024, out came the chapbook, I Was a Teenage Exorcist. Meanwhile, in 2023, Salmon Poetry here in Ireland published his debut full collection, Nightlight. He has a new pamphlet coming soon from the Emma Press called Masters on Ekphrastic Poetry, a second full collection of the works called Real Estate. And in between all of this, he's also a playwright. His first play appeared back in 2008, A Stint in Your Spotlight, as part of the International Dublin Gay Theatre Festival. And of course, he's also the editor-in-chief at Impossible Archetype. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. I'm not quite sure where you find the time to join us in between all of that, but it's a delight to have you with us on the podcast.
Thank you, Damien. Thanks for having me. God, yeah, it sounds quite extensive when you lay it all out like that.
It does, and then you think like you also have like a proper job at the library, like in between all of this. It's incredible.
Yeah, I get bored very easily.
Well, if as a fan of your poetry, I think it's very good that you get bored often and you keep writing and are so prolific. I always like to start with beginning. Where did you first fall in love? How did it begin? So give us an idea, how did poetry first sort of take over your life? Because it sounds like it's taken over.
It has absolutely taken over to the detriment of everything else. It started from a young age in English class in school, and it specifically started with, I don't know if you remember, I think we're of a similar age, when in secondary schools, they used to sell books direct to schools, and you get a little catalogue and you give them to the students, and you could buy books at discounted prices. And they had Faber pocket titles. So I bought W.H. Auden, I bought Wendy Cope, I bought Simon Armitage. So it introduced me to all these poets at a very young age, and that kind of spurred me off.
Where was your secondary school?
I was Del Sal College in Churchtown. But yeah, we had a great English teacher, Jim Walsh. And he was the first person I showed my terrible teenage poetry to, and he was very encouraging. So I think that was the real beginnings of it. And then I wrote and wrote and wrote for a very long time. I wrote, as you know, everyone does, absolute garbage for the longest time. I think I wrote my first decent poem when I was about 28, perhaps. And yeah, I was in bands for years, so I kind of cut my teeth on that as well, writing lyrics. And yeah, I kept going until I kind of settled on my first main project, which was Circumference. So that's actually a long project that's still ongoing because it's the first of 3 books. So I published the chapbook for that in 2018, and it's going to be a novel in verse. So there'll be that book, a book called, and 2 more books. The next book is called Bordering, and the last book is called Boundary. And the second book will be like a short full-length collection, and the third book will be the same length as Circumference, which is a chapbook. So it'll be about 110 pages.
Did you know it was going to be sort of a trilogy from the beginning? Was that the plan?
No, it was much longer. It was intended to be my first full-length collection, and I wrote a full-length collection, and it was bad. I threw 2/3 of it in the bin, and then it worked. So I started again. I went, oh, okay, I'll publish that on its own. But yeah, I kind of knew that it would cover a long period of time, but I didn't realize how long until I was kind of well into the writing of the first one, and then I realized it would cover kind of from his teenage years right up until his 60s. So it runs from his birth in the 20s up until the late 1970s.
It's interesting what you said. When we were all kids and teenagers, you're constantly writing poetry, and you think it's great until you realize it's not. And you're 28, suddenly you think, oh, now I've wrote a poem. But also, when you come to your first book and you think it's a collection, and you're like, okay, look, I'm done. This is it. Great. How amazing am I? I'm a poet, and I have a collection. And then you chop. What did you say? Like 2/3?
2/3, like yeah. More, possibly 3/4. I threw it all in the bin, and then the bits that were good, I realized had all spoken to each other.
But these
I was like,
learning curves, aren't they?
Absolutely. It's a huge learning curve, and I mean, I would have written lots and lots of poems before that, and kind of probably had private things that I would have tried to put together collections, because this was the first real attempt at like a professional collection. But even then, I jumped 2/3 of it. I'm glad I did, to be honest, because it's a much stronger piece. But this is the project that I always like. When I realized the guts of it, I like the scope of it. I was like, oh God, this is going to take like 10 years. This is poetry, and this is what we do.
And was this a part of your mentorship?
No, this predated the mentorship. So there was a, oh God, I have a very specific inspiration. There was a documentary on Peter Wildwood, who was involved with he was one of the last people criminalized in the 60s before the decriminalization of homosexuality in Britain. And he subsequently spoke to the Wolfenden Committee about how they should overturn it, and which they did. There was a docudrama on BBC, and he picked up an American GI outside a tube station. And I went, ooh, who's that American GI? And that's where this started. This book for years, Circumference, was called American GI. And that's his story. So it starts with him as a teenager. And the middle book will be about him in London in wartime, mainly because he has no other choice, because he's been kicked out by his family. So he had to kind of sign up to survive as a 18-year-old. That's the kind of guts of the story. And then the first book, Circumference, is kind of about his teenage years with his boyfriend Mike, and then him coming back as kind of a guy in his 30s for his father's funeral. So yeah, it's like, I didn't shy away from the opening. It was a heavy kind of thing to start off with. But if you're making them cry, you're doing it right.
Well, yeah, exactly. But also, it's interesting because I'm realizing that, yes, we do have a large age gap. And when you're talking about what was available to you, they weren't available. That was, I think, about 10 years after me. When I was in school, everything was sort of dusty and hideous, and poetry was there, but it was kind of forced down your throat. It was a little bit like learning Irish. It was demanded, and you paid attention, but there was nothing injected into it that made you think, oh my God, this could be something that I wanted to do. But I was wondering, because when I was in school, I was bullied quite a lot for being gay, when I didn't even know what gay meant.
Same.
That's what I was wondering. So, like, your first book, your first chapbook, then it relates to being gay, being a part of the queer community, and of course we'll speak later about the journal. What was school life like?
I was bullied in I have two memories. So in primary school, I was bullied. There was they used to run around with imaginary spray bottles that sprayed gay onto me. And then they made them at one point. They actually made them out of cardboard and chased me around spraying gay on me. I don't know why they would spray gay onto me if they were being homophobic. And then the other was in secondary school, there was this guy and his sidekick who just hated my guts. And pretty sure it was because I was gay. But I think being bullied kind of skewers things, because I look back now and I realize I was much better liked and got on with people a lot better than I thought I did. It was just the fact that I'd been bullied earlier, and I was bullied by these one or two people that kind of skewered everything else. I think it's an interesting thing to overcome psychologically. And like, there's poems in Circumference about it. There's a poem called Salem where they go on a school trip, and they're kind of being looked at very strangely, him and his boyfriend. And in fact, there's a poem, one of the poems I'm going to read for you now, I think, is from Circumference. It's called Monsters in the Closet. So he's 16 and he's in the cinema in September 1940 with his boyfriend Mike, and they're watching horror movies. And Monsters in the Closet is a book by academic Harry M. Benshoff, and it's wonderful. I don't know if it's probably not too well known, but it's a history of homosexuality in horror film. So it kind of retraces all of that through the lens of kind of being gay and queerness. So I respectfully cribbed his title, and I wrote this poem, Monsters in the Closet. Saturdays are spent in the dark, creature double feature, Mike's hand clasped in mine, or trailing tickles down forearm. In almost darkness, heads confined shoulders, heartbeats slow to satiated symmetry. Back with Boris Karloff this week, he wears the fur of a skinned ape, the bloody pelt slathered on him. A roar escapes his mouth. He doesn't recognize the pile of pale pink skin. He forgets himself and flees to freedom. A boy-girl couple tilt-a-whirl after him whilst we kiss through the exposition, losing interest when the good guys close in, preferring skin to resolution. The monster ruined by the hero's fist, the viewer's gaze complicit. We exit before the end, unaccredited. And I think that's where, that poem obviously plays into the notion of like queer people identifying with the monster, which is, I think, something we all do, identify with the weirdos and the monsters, and, taking that wholesale on and being like, yes, we are the monsters and we love the monsters, and give us the weirdos and the horror movies.
When I was a kid, I was addicted to horror movies. I was convinced for a while that I was the Omen, that I was the son of the devil. And there was an excitement in that. I even remember like Freddy Krueger and sort of having long nails so that I would walk down the corridors and like I would just move my fingers to kind of like feel those nails because the corridors were full of bullies. But in my head, I was this monster. I was that thing that seemed to be able to get control over situations.
I mean, it makes sense. And like, I think I'm only kind of realizing this now, even with some of the poems that I'm going to read for you today. Like, I have little horror stories in a lot of my poetry. It's kind of prevalent that those kind of poems, poems as horror stories. I think it's kind of definitely there in my work, and I think I've just realized that now, saying it out loud. But
I was going to say another poem to read from Circumference.
Yeah, so this is kind of like a sneak preview. So, as I mentioned earlier, Tommy has, at the end of the book, two things happen. And when he's a teenager, he's kind of found out by his parents to have a boyfriend, and it's the early 1940s, and they're not best pleased, is probably the best way to put it. But also, and that kind of results in him being ousted and stranded and completely on his own and penniless. And he ends up joining the army to survive. So this is a poem that I haven't actually read anywhere before, and it's from Bordering, and it's called Basic, as in basic training, and it's set between March and June 1942. Starved, starving, they push you, but to walk 5 miles on a good day, never mind 20, a backpack full of bricks can't stop, can't stick, can't sit, 200 jumping jacks, 200 push-ups, the chest emerging, you look at yourself in the mirror, exhausted, exhausting what's left of your stomach, now toned. You crawl into bed, you wake up in darkness, sleep, a commodity earned, a hum of 63 bodies. Billy snoring, keeping everyone awake, a pillow over his head for 2 nights. He doesn't sleep, he doesn't keep anyone up. Rest is all we have. Slopping every inch of the floors, people clean their boots at the door, knowing they're next with the wire brush for a GI shower. We become respectful, tidy. 3, 4 hours sleep, a couple snap and talk back, are made to run laps while the rest of us dream. We all fall in line, able to drop off at a moment's notice. The wonders half an hour rack time can achieve. Precision as best as a shaking hand can. You can't let them see. You need to hit the target. Steady yourself. Breathe. Stab the straw dummy. The sergeant wants you to imagine it bleeding. Imagine it scream. It won't be as neat as this. They see you shake and you're assigned a mountain of potatoes. Glad to be sat, your hands cramp, you listen to the shouts in the distance, you can't eat a spud for weeks. That evening, they wait until after lights out, start screaming, 2 minutes to get ready, night fighting, capture the flag, drag your body across the field, don't get caught. Losers do laps around the barracks, the sound of feet, a lullaby almost too tired to notice Jack's glance in the shower as you dream of Mike. You cry Night again, driven miles out into it, a map and a compass, find your way home. Last to arrive, gold bricks are given K rations, guard duty, everything designed to fuck up your sleep, hit the target, shoot the head, the heart, make an impact, get used to the recoil, the shoulder bruising. Jack in the showers, where does he get the energy? You sleep. You dream of Mike, you learn to cry quietly, you don't get lost in the woods, you run faster, not out of breath, capable almost despite yourself. You learn to fire, not a sharpshooter, but competent. You guard the barracks from nobody. Jack sneaks out with Pooch, a farm boy with a home to go back to. You shake your head, you are relieved and dream of Mike. The months gone by go by, you never stop being tired, but you keep going, part of the squad, a home. You can do what's asked of you. You can make a go of this. Finally, get used to it, and it's over. You're trained. A truck arrives. Some of you get in. The rest you might never see again. Jack with a small wave on your way out. You pass another truck. Terrified, new recruit.
Oh, wow. Extraordinary reading, by the way.
Thank you.
I always enjoy listening to you read, because I don't know whether it's the playwright in you, but you bring the words to life. You give the character their own individual voice.
Thank you.
I want to talk kind of about sort of, I suppose, going beyond sort of that drudge on the bullies to growing up to finally, getting down and dirty, which is something I find very intriguing when I'm always reading your poems. Every now and then I read a poem and I have to stop and look and make sure that I'm dressed, because I feel somehow midway through reading your poems, I've been undressed. Yeah, and sometimes I'm on a bus and it seems inappropriate to be on a bus reading a book of poetry naked. Sex.
Yeah, well, maybe not. You could probably get away with it.
It depends on the bus.
Depends which bus, indeed.
I think I said this to you recently. I said, like, your work, I feel, is faultlessly provocative, sensual, downright horny, which I suppose in part comes to me as a revelation, because it's a rarity. Even today, queer sex, especially in poetry, I can count sort of possibly on one hand, like maybe two hands, recently the poems that I found from other writers who write about queer sex and write about it without being apologetic. Like, you just write about it's there, it's in your face, it's in front of you. It's not, oh, by the way, perhaps I'm just going to, in the dark, pull up a cover. It's real and it's raw. Tell us, is this a necessary part of your writing? Is this just something that came along, or do you feel that there's a void and this is missing and you wanted to fill it?
Pun very much intended.
A little bit.
I think initially it's just writing what interests me, what intrigues me, and the dynamics, the physicality, the interpersonal relationships, the act of sex, all of it intrigues me from a writing perspective. I think writing about sex from a queer perspective kind of had almost, like you said, it's not seen too much and it's fallen out of fashion. And I think it was definitely, I've never been scared of writing it. The poem that I will read after we finish this section of the conversation, I sent it to somebody and they said about, I can't remember who it was genuinely and which magazine, but they were like, I don't think they'll publish it because it's quite explicit. And I was like, is it? I was genuinely, is it? Because it's just the norm to me. It's just kind of the language of life. But I mean, I was very, I don't know, maybe I come from a slightly naive place, because I remember, like, I made the decision ultimately to open Nightlight with a poem about somebody having unprotected sex in a sex club.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh yeah, I did that. But that to me is no different from poems about trees, which I also have, and poems about, whatever you want. But I do think it is, yeah, I mean, I've definitely kind of leaned into it. And I also think, how do I put this? I also think that I'm a single man, so I'm, out there in the world, and to a
Yeah.
certain extent, it reflects my life and my interests. And sex is great, and writing about it is interesting. I had a book which we had a conversation at some launch, and I was saying, oh, I have another pamphlet, but I think I'm going to give it a miss at the moment because I have so many pamphlets. But I did actually make a sex pamphlet, like a pamphlet of sex poems and kind of sex
Yeah.
and kind of the aftermath. So it's half sex poems and it's half kind of that scene in an art house movie where you're walking home in the kind of misty air / rain, spattering of rain after you've hooked up. That's the kind of vibe for the book. But it wasn't picked up, and I kind of thought, oh, I might knock it on its head and just incorporate them into the book. But yeah, no, that's so that was me kind of leaning into it. I don't know. What do you think? I feel like people don't really talk about it in frank terms in poetry, and I'm not really sure why. Maybe it's not interesting to them. I feel like to some people it's just not an interesting thing to talk about, but it certainly interests me. What do you think?
I still think that we're shocked when we read it. And I think sometimes I'm shocked when I read it because there's this guy who lived in the closet for like 9 years, from
Mm,
sort of figuring out that I was gay at the age of like, or different sort of at the age of 7 to not coming out until 18 and sort of missing
mm,
all those, early experiences of like late teenage years and
yeah,
repressing all of that. And I wrote like for a while, I thought I was even anti-gay at one point. Like, if somebody seemed
yeah.
a bit too feminine, I was sort of annoyed with it. And I think it was because there was a bully that had got inside me and told me what was wrong, and I was then reconfiguring myself with the idea.
Mm,
And I think sometimes now I look at like when I read poetry about gay sex or see a film about gay sex, I'm like, oh God, like really? Oh, are we showing this? Because I'm still
mm.
getting used to it. But I think it still needs to be more. And I think in poetry we still need to be pushed.
I think you also need to, as a writer, be going to places where you're like, am I going to write that poem? Am I
Yeah.
going to do that? I have a poem which I didn't include in this reading, but it's unpublished. I think that's why. It's called Friday, and it's
Mhm.
about the first time after I discussed it that I decided to have unprotected sex with a sexual
Mhm.
partner, because I had been on prep and I decided that this was something I want to experience. And we were talking about kind of growing up and that kind of anti-gayness.
Yeah.
You would have also grown up with it's referenced in the poem with those AIDS ads where they had the
Yeah.
tombstones, "Don't die of ignorance,"
Yeah.
and like the horrors of that, and growing up with this specter of HIV and AIDS, which obviously is still there, but it's a very different landscape now with undetectable as untransmissible and very effective HIV meds and PrEP and PEP and stuff like that. But even then, it was kind of overcoming oneself to being like, I won't die. This won't kill me. I can do this if I want to do this, you
Mhm.
know? And
Mhm.
I think, and that was a poem that I had to write, but it's also kind of a scary poem to put out there because, yeah, okay, the poets read it, but what happens if, the person you work with reads it? And is that a weird conversation? You know what I mean? You can't
Yeah.
control who reads things.
But we still have a relatively unique perspective. The gay world has a
Mm,
relatively unique perspective in how in sex, in what sex is
mm,
like, in the precautions that we have to take in order to have sex, in order
sure.
to enjoy it. And I think these are valuable insights for, anybody who's young and coming out and exploring
Yeah.
that they can just instead of like going to some school and reading some sterilized guide to being a teenager or being an adult or have or
Mm,
some sexual relations, that they get to sort of feel the realness of it.
yeah,
and the,
absolutely.
and
And the
that's what you
very
bring.
the varied nature of it. It could
Mhm.
be monogamous relationships, polyamorous relationships. It could be hookups. It could be
Yeah.
whatever you
Yeah.
want. Like, you know what I mean? And there was a friend of mine who said to me, he's older than I am, and he said the thing I like about gay sex, about being gay, not gay sex,
Mhm.
but about being gay, is that it's somewhat ageless.
Yeah.
You could be 55, you could be 60, you could be 20. You can all come together, pun intended,
Mhm.
um, and live the life that you want to live. I think there's perhaps more like we're not stuck with the kind of heterosexual dynamic of get married, have kids, settle down,
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So I think, and although we fought for that rightly, and although it was something that, you know, we needed that equality for, I think there's
Mm.
plenty of people that isn't an interest for them. And it's good to have all kind of voices kind of spoken about. God, I feel a bit preachy there. I'm on my soapbox there, I think.
I like your soapbox. Well, listen, instead of just sitting on the soapbox, how about I've checked, I'm wearing
Yeah.
clothes, it's safe.
Okay. So I can read a text poem, it's fine.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So this is a poem that will be in my next collection with Salmon, which is out in May 2026, called Real Estate. So this is one of the sex poems. I do, I do also, just before I read this, I do also have, like, if we're talking about going full tilt, I do have a poem in it. And for some reason, it was important to me that it was all in lowercase and it wasn't in title punctuation. The poem is just called Cum Dum. And the first line is, it's not the filling. I'll leave it at that. This poem, however, is much sweeter, and it is called In the Air. I make you come without either of us touching your dick, and the awe in your face. We are surrounded by fog. You drove us up the mountains beyond where lovers park. I'd got out to take a piss and couldn't see in front of me, not fog, but thick clouds, the Super Mario level where the world theoretically exists below it, but only if you fall. The car crept by, it just missed hitting us. It doesn't realize we are here. You have never been as relaxed as this. Our hard breathing slowed, softened. Shall we go? I nod, and you drive through the clouds, my face pressed to the windscreen.
Wow. There is a real softness to that, but also there's a real directness, in the dick, the cum, like
Yeah.
I think poetry expects that everything is going to be like covered in rose petals and delicate.
And
Whereas
it's,
no, it
yeah.
needs to be, we're talking about sex and we're talking like sex isn't always about love. Sex is just a way that, we come together to do whatever we want to do.
But I love the intimacy in that poem as well. And it's
Yeah.
also purposely, I'm a big fan and proponent of the sonnet form, and I write so often in it. And I love what you can do with it, and how you can play with the octet and the sesta and the volta and the turn. Like the turn there is the world exists below us, but only if you fall. That's the kind of break there for me. But like taking that very traditional form and writing that in a sonnet form is just delectable. You know what I mean? It's irresistible, really.
Well, listen, I'm going to jump to the journal because
Yeah.
it feels like a good shift now. By the word shift.
In that context,
so
certainly.
in that context, yes, exactly.
Do you have your clothes on, Damien?
Most of them. So we're staying with queer poetry. We're moving on to platforms. You started back, was it 2016, 2017?
Yeah, I started it towards the end of 2016, and the first issue was launched at the very start in March 2017. That was the first issue.
So incredible. So Impossible Archetype, incredible curation of voices from the queer community, and so vital and so global. I'm always intrigued by the fact that it's not just like 10 poets from Dublin 8.
Yeah, no, I'm really blessed with that, to be honest. And I'm not entirely sure why. I think, again, it's that kind of queer community where it's like, in the way that, you go into a gay bar, you've got people of all classes. I think queer poets do band together. So having a specifically queer poetry journal, kind of the word somewhat got out amongst queer poets who kind of friend each other because they're queer poets, irrespective of whether they're in America or Australia or France or wherever. So I think that was really good. And although initially I was a bit like, nobody realizes this is an Irish journal, although that has absolutely changed now, which is lovely to see as well. I got the Irish Writers Handbook today, 2025, and Impossible Archetype was listed in it. I was very, very thrilled. It's always nice to see Impossible Archetype in something like that, or in a collection credits. But it was just, I think as well, partly that it's online, and it's just accessible. And I'll be honest, I was being lazy. I didn't want to work at distribution. I didn't want to print a physical thing. The notion of me, I was like, I'm not going to do it if I have to do that. So I just didn't. But no, I think as well, part of the sustainability of it for me is that I only have to do it. I only have to read 4 months a year. And I can probably push that. Like the reading windows are only 4 months a year in total. And I put out 2 issues because it's just me. I always say welcome to the people at Impossible Archetype, but it's just me. There's no readers, which I think is good. I think it gives it a very singular, like it's a varied thing. And I think because I tend to publish about 50 poems an issue, which is...
Yeah, the issues are huge, like, and they're vastly diverse.
Yeah, no, it's really good. I'm really glad at how it's kind of attracted a good range of voices, and kind of there's people who've had a poem in every single issue, which is wonderful, and I love that. And there's people, from it's a lot of kind of queer, lesbian poets, a lot of really interesting younger trans poets that have published a good few, and I've been a lot of poets' first publications, which is always a special honor, I feel.
The amount that comes out, like we said, is about 50 issue, and they are extraordinary. Like they're very rarely like a weak point. It's very rarely one where I go, okay, I'm just gonna, okay, grand, I'll move on to the next one. I'm always kind of like, oh God, Jesus, like that hooker. Maybe it's a line or something, but there's the caliber is incredible. How is it in terms of the selection process?
I mean, ultimately, it just has to excite me. It has to give me that urge. It has to be like you say, where it's like, oh, it's that thing. And because there's no barrier in terms of printing, there's no barrier in terms of publication, bar me making a PDF and uploading it. If it excites me and it's well written and well crafted, then it's going in the magazine. That's it, basically. But I get that, and I think it keeps me involved, and it keeps my brain ticking over in interesting ways, and it keeps me young in certain ways, in that I'm always reading these reams of new poetry from queer poets and picking out these ones that I love and promoting them. And I think it kind of strengthens me as a writer as well, to be involved in that process and looking at poems critically and seeing, well, why am I picking this poem, and why does this excite me, and what in this excites me? So you're doing this work in your own writing in the background the whole time as well. So it's really beneficial.
Yeah, that's really interesting too, because I found the exact same thing, and especially just even in terms of how you submit, and whether there's a cover letter and what it is, from seeing people come in and submit to me, and thinking, oh yeah, maybe they didn't read that because they didn't, I asked for this and they did that, and then you think, yeah, but sometimes you just miss things, and then there's the other ones who will come in, and I've asked for like a font of 12 and it's a font of 26, and you're thinking, wow, okay, it's like 3 words per page. This is strange.
I once had a regular who would send me like reams and reams of stuff and go, just pick whatever you want. And I'm like, no.
I love it because I made it into Impossible Archetype, and I made it after a long time. Like I applied and applied and applied, and you used to, and it was amazing because you always reply. You have a very quick turnaround in your replies, and I used to think, like, oh God, all right, I've just sent it. All right. I just sent that one. Okay. Oh my God. But what it made me realize when I finally got the acceptance was, I wrote a poem. I see the journey, and I've been writing poetry for a long time, but it was just like on a blog, and I thought poetry was about, you wrote something down on a page, and then I typed it and I published it, and people came on and said nice things or pretty things. They didn't say anything, and that was it. And it wasn't then until I came to also doing sort of my first collection, not the first pamphlet, but the first collection, where I had like 120 poems. And I remember Anna Saunders from Cheltenham sitting down with me and going, yeah, we need to cut like at least half of this. And I was thinking, oh God. And then we need to edit down your poems, and let's cut out the first like stanza. Again, poetry is a learning process, and you keep learning as you go along.
Of course, and like you said, it's not just the writing, it's the editing, it's the, I have certain poems that, I have a poem called Low Ceilings, which I started, I was married for like 10 years, and I started that at the end of that, and like I only finished it like this year. It took like longer than my longest relationship, like it's crazy. But I think in terms of the editing as well, like I think you mentioned Nell Regan earlier, and she was hugely important. And to me, she was my mentor for my first collection, Nightlight. And I got that through what was then the Words Ireland's national mentorship scheme. And I was hugely, like, it transformed my writing just to have like those 4 sessions where we just sat down and looked at things. And like that, it really changed my point of view
Mm-hmm.
on what a book is, but also like, well, why? I think I thought like that it was going to be like, oh yeah, we'll cut out some poems, and then it ended up honing in on certain poems and line edits and really digging into them and going, oh, this is not what I thought it would be, And some of them I rewrote multiple times.
Uh-huh.
But that whole process, and I always think more than anything, like if anyone's looking for advice, get the most eyes on it you
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
Get the most eyes on it you can. Look at people whose poetry you love. Be nice to them. Ask them to read your poetry. Shout out to Nell, and shout out to my good friend Eric Norris, who I befriended on Facebook because I read his book and I said I really like it, and he said
Oh,
I sent him a message and he goes, "Oh, you sent me one of your poems," and we've been honestly, he's one of my best friends ever since. I've known him about 11 years, and he's an excellent poet, Eric Thomas Norris. So he's an
that's
American poet.
incredible.
Yeah. So that was kind of, I read one of his books and we became friends from it. But he's very much my mentor. And between him and Nell, my poetry would have been a shadow of itself without the two of them. So huge thanks to them.
I'm sort of looking toward the future now, and your progression and thinking
Mm.
of accessing things. Like you're now accessing a canvas, multiple canvases. You're accessing the work of gay artists and turning that into the new collection, Master.
Yeah. So yeah, Masters is it is it was kind of a pandemic project. So there
Mm-hmm.
was a brief lull in, I think after the first lockdown, there was a big exhibition of Derek Jarman's work at IMA, and it
Yeah.
was phenomenal. And it wasn't the stuff that people knew. There was a painting there called Landscape of Blue Pool. And I just became entranced by it. And I wrote a poem based on it. And I just kept thinking about it. And then I saw another painting by some other gay artist, and I thought about it as deeply. And I ended up writing this book over a couple of years, and it's response poems to dead queer male painters' work.
Mm-hmm.
Don't ask me how I settled on that remit, but that's the remit I settled on. Yeah, it became this really interesting project. So I ended up with 20 poems. I wrote about 33 or something like that.
Uh-huh.
But I ended up with a book of 20 poems, and I realize now that it was kind of my way to kind of reconnect with my gay history. That makes
Yeah.
sense, to
Yeah.
reconnect with my gay history and kind of keep the lineage going, because I often think about that, and I have a good friend, Steve, who we were talking about kind of queer lineage and stuff like that, and it both interests us. But that kind of history and that kind of, it can be lost. It's still,
Mm-hmm.
people don't necessarily have children or people to pass on these legacies to. So kind of, if we don't engage with it, it can be lost. So that was kind of my way to do it. And yeah, so I have poems after Keith Haring, Derek Jarman, Francis Bacon, Dennis Worth Miller, Irish, English, American, Polish painters. So all these different painters, and it kind of focuses on um, kind of relationship between the artist and the model as an archetype, but also kind of like queer relationships and historical queer relationships and kind of power dynamics and stuff like that. And the poem that I'm actually going to read from that is was in the first issue of The Storms, which I was so thrilled to be in this wonderful magazine. And you nominated it for a pushcart, which was my first ever nomination, and it was absolutely thrilling. So thank you for that. And yeah, so this is after
It had
Dennis
to
Worth.
happen. We had to do it. We loved, as I said, we loved it.
Oh, thank you. This is after Dennis Worth Miller's painting, Marsh Landscape. Soon all the water inside me will breach my skin, flooding the studio apartment. All our furniture will become sodden. I will turn on the heat, but it won't help. By dawn, the water will reach my ankles. By dusk, reeds will have sprouted around me. Now in our bed, not touching, I know that you've decided to go, but can't say it. I try to hold you, but my hands crumble. Too long like this, I am bog. I am peat. Burn me for life. Lose a body in me. So yeah, that is going to be
Wow.
in the book, and that's coming out from the Emma Press in October next year, which is very exciting. I still can't believe I actually got in. I'm very thrilled because I remember I got on the long list and a poet messaged me and went, "Oh, you got on the long list," and I went, "I know. I'm certainly not going to go any further than that."
Because the Empress is intriguing. Like it's been going for quite some time now, but it's niche, and they're such careful curators.
Such careful curators, and they've been an absolute dream to work with, and they're just so the attention they put on each book and each title is just unmatched.
When is Real Estate coming out?
So Real Estate is coming out in May 2026. So that's my second full length collection with Salmon. So yeah, that's kind of it's a book about house and home, hence the title, but like
Hmm.
kind of what you make your home, who you make your home, what happens when that changes. Um, all sorts of things. It kind of starts and ends in media res, so you're kind of starts in a dream and ends in a dream. Yeah, there's a whole theme of houses. So there's the poem I'm going to read is tiny house. There's renovation. There's new build, and this is one of those little horror poems that I
Mhm.
mentioned earlier. So this is called Tiny House. Um, Everything has its space. Fold away beds, desks, shelves out of reach. The washer levitates. Your office resides in the mirror, you in it. The outside abandoned, and I sleep on my own. Limbs jigsawed, my feet cook on the grill, hands stick out the cat flap, eyes water from the bleached toilet, still full of your stink. You built our house for one around me. My body is the last brick.
Mark, I think someday somebody will be taking your poems as their inspiration for their paintings and painting these
Oh,
extraordinary canvases that later somebody else will then write about their interpretation that began with you. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today on Eat the Storms. It has been an absolute pleasure.
it has been an absolute pleasure for me too. Thank you so much.
And to finish off today, I'm going to leave you with a prose poem that I wrote about 7 years ago when I was living in Paris. I was living at the 14th arrondissement at the time near a park called Montsouris. It was my second time to return to Paris, as I'd moved there originally when I was 21. And then after many travels through London and Amsterdam, I moved back again when I was 40. Montsouris Park is a beautiful man-made park, and it's famous for a misplaced meridian. There is a monument in the park, a stone monument that indicates the location of the meridian of Paris, which is the imaginary line that passes from north to south through the centre of Paris. And this line, which was first defined by French astronomers in 1667, was used as a 0 point for longitude on all French maps until 1884, when France agreed reluctantly to use longitudes measured from the Greenwich Observatory in London instead. And when I was leaving that park on the Sunday morning on the 1st of January, a single balloon, was making its way through the street alone in front of me. This is called Balloon. Balloon. See the balloon. See thoughts float through space, meander through the mind. Wild thoughts, drifting thoughts, blue thoughts, white thoughts, red thoughts, thoughts arriving unannounced, uninvited, unaware of the current climate, thoughts that rise like balloons on silent streets on sleepy Sundays in the suburbs, to the south of her centre where it's slow to shock and surprise. Though if no one ever sees it, was it ever really there? Thoughts float through time, suggestions, signs from unconscious minds, disruptive thoughts, distracting thoughts. I held his hand in a taxi while thinking of another, then came back, but he was gone, or I had changed, or the memory was never a true account of the reality. Maybe he'd held mine. Thoughts trickle as I float through strange streets, mounting Montserrat in a misplaced meridian on a Sunday morning, drawing conclusions of held hands next to monuments out of line, drawing inspiration wherever necessary, wherever noticed. See the balloon. Draw outside the line. Thoughts float like balloons, like bodies, like taxis, never knowing if it's a considered curve or just a current we're caught in, and if it cannot be captured, can it ever be caressed? If I leave, will I be remembered? If I run, will I be missed? If I come back, could it all have been a dream before? They thought this was the centre at once, this pacified part of Paris. Drew lines to draw them back to where positions could be measured, redrew them later when location fell from favour. Thoughts float like balloons through the air, oxidising, fueling, thinking. Thoughts float, fragile and free, some never to be caught, some never to be caressed. Thoughts fade. Even the marker on this monument has been ground down. Thoughts float, balloons blow and then burst, roads lead out, and to reverse is not to replay. I will not stay inside the line. Capture me, it, them, all, everything, before I, we, it all fade, before I, we, it all burst. Balloon. See the balloon. See the being. See the beginning. See the beginning of something bright, even on silent streets in a sleepy suburb on a Sunday, south of all that seemed once upon a time to be central. See it all, where simple things can shine. See it now. Here, on front, before it bursts, breaks free, blows beyond that line. Poetic peeps and gentle persons, in-betweeners and nonconformers, genders all and genders equal. We've reached the end of another episode of Eat the Storms, the poetry podcast. My name is Damien B. Donnelly. I've been your host and producer, and I'd like to say a huge thank you to you, the listeners, for tuning in on platforms like Spotify, Apple, Google, Breaker, Podbean, Player FM, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Podcast Addicts, iTunes, Amazon Music, and even YouTube. A huge thank you to my four sensational guests on the podcast today, who were Mark Ward, who joined me for Behind the Storms, Carmel McKeown, James McConachie, and Katie Donovan. For details, as always, on all of my guests, you can head on over to eatthestorms.com, click on the podcast section, and there you'll find a blog post for every episode. This was episode 11, season 9, and in that blog post you'll find a bio, social media handles, photos, all the ways that you need to find, follow, and be fans of all of my guests, and perhaps even buy some of their collections that you've heard on the episode today, or maybe it'll be a reminder to you, if you are a part of the LGBTQAI+ community, that next time the Impossible Archetype opens for their submissions, you will be there first in the queue. Now, that is definitely I repeat, definitely the final episode for 2024. We will be back with you again next week. We have 3 episodes left of season 9, and then we're on a break until the summer, but we will open for submissions for the 10th season of Eat the Storms in spring of this year. So do keep an eye out on the website and on all our social media platforms for our submission shoutouts. And hopefully we'll also be bringing you another chance to submit to The Storms, our journal of poetry, prose and visual arts. But for now, from me, your host and producer and editor-in-chief of The Storms Journal, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has participated, both in the podcast and on the journal this year. It means the world to me, so truly thank you all so much for being sensational stormers. Thank you for being wonderful listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in, for supporting, for shouting, and for our Podcast for Palestine special fundraising episode this year. We raised €2,000 to go to children, not numbers. Thank you so much. I hope that next year we do not have to do another fundraising episode, because we will have realised that we live in a world where to be able to celebrate our differences is so much more important, so much more special, so much more sacred than shooting each other down. Until next week, until next year, take care of yourselves, ring in the new year with as much light and hope as possible, and of course, as always, stay bloody poetic.